Look, as we've just been saying, it just got a lot harder to navigate the murky world of online misinformation. Fake news is now so rampant. So the question is, how do we make sure that the information we consume and share is legitimate? And might some sort of media literacy training be the answer? Well, there may be a need for it. When we look at 18 to 16-year-olds in Australia, 43% say they can't tell whether a news story is real or fake. So we caught up with some students from St Patrick's Marist College in Sydney who were recently finalists in a school newspaper competition who are pretty cluey when it comes to fact-finding.
I don't really have a lot of access to social media, but I do get a lot of my news from sites like YouTube, even though it's not really the most reliable.
When my mum watches the news at night, I'll normally look over her shoulder and, look at what's on TV.
I have social media, so that pops up on my feed every day. Even Google, there's always that little sidebar underneath the Google search bar. And I always find quite some interesting articles there.
There's definitely a big worry with wondering if what you're reading is true. I think people are now beginning to understand and are starting to combat, the fake news, and obviously in school people are starting to learn how to double check your sources.
I really think it's difficult to tell fake news. I feel like that's what people get trapped in. We want to believe certain things because we want to have our opinions validated and we want to be validated ourselves. And so I feel like that's how fake news gets really consumed.
I feel like most of the time I am able to differentiate between the real news and the fake news. I do have a lot of trust in bigger news sources like ABC, 7 News, but if smaller ones that are pretty much entirely based online, I'm a tad more iffy because some of them can just seem outlandish. Just from the headline you can be like, oh, is that even news?
Websites especially are really good now at making them look professional, and so I think it's just slightly going with your gut feeling, does this sound right? Is it too good to be true?
I always read the URLs now because you can see .com or .org or .au or .gov. That's really important to look at.
I think fake news will still always be there, but I think people will learn how to evolve and how to combat that themselves.
I lean on the side of caution because there's always going to be some fake news.
That's so good, erring on the side of caution. But clearly not everyone is quite as savvy online as they are. Saffron Howden is a journalist and a writer of the book Kid Reporter, The Secret to Breaking News. It's a handbook for kids to learn about how journalism works. But it also asks them to engage in complicated questions like how do you tell the difference between a lie and a fact? When does statement become opinion? And is it okay to have multiple perspectives on the same event? Advice I'm sure all of us at any age could benefit from. Welcome to The Drum. We're joined by Saffron Howden in the Blue Mountains. Good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, we had all the students there who were like, I just go on gut instinct, I'm just really cautious, I just look at the headline. I mean, they seem to be very canny when it came to gauging the news. How do you teach kids literacy? How do we teach them to separate fake news from real news?
Yeah, well, look, I think those kids have got it. I think we're in safe hands. I'm not as worried anymore. But if you're not those kids, I think there's a lot that we can do. And in Kid Reporter, we've got a whole section dedicated to how to be a news detective, which is basically, how to spot misinformation and disinformation. And I think it's a skill that not just kids need, but from listening to today's discussion about Facebook and all the events over the past couple of weeks, I think we all need a dose of this. So I think one of the skills that journalists have that they use every single day, which is really transferable to everyone, and in our book to kids at school, is that skeptical approach to information. So no matter what information is thrown at you, you're asking a number of questions. You're asking who produced the information. Why did they produce it? What was the motivation behind it? And why did they share it? What's its purpose? And not until you answer those questions do you do something with that information, like use it to make a decision, that's going to affect your life or to share it with others. And I think these are really critical skills that definitely need to be brought into our education system in the schools that they're not already, and that's a lot of them. They now need to be embedded because it's a life skill that I think that kids desperately need.
And you advise the approach of wearing hats. Can you explain what that is and how we can differentiate between hats?
Yeah, this is an analogy I've used for a little while now in media literacy work. So my thinking is that, you know, we're exposed to all different types of information. There's a big focus on news today, but when, you know, say you're going through your social media feed, if it's Facebook or even if you're searching something on YouTube or it's Instagram or Twitter or whatever it might be, you've got news articles, you've got entertainment, you might watch a movie, you might watch television, you've got advertisements popping up in the midst of all of that, you've got opinion. And what we advise in the book, my co-author and I, is that each time you're confronted with different information, so you pop on a different hat. So if you're looking at an advertisement, there's no problem with looking at an advertisement, but you need to be conscious that someone is trying to sell you something to get you to buy a product or service. And when you're being entertained, there might be an emotional response to that, but those aren't facts that you use to make a decision. So we approach these things with this sort of idea of different types of information need different approaches, and you have to switch your mind depending on what you're consuming.
Just interested in what your hat collection might look like, Malcolm Farr, and I'm wondering if you can tell us about the panel that you were on a few years back, I think, a little while ago, talking about misinformation.
Yes, it was talking about this very issue we're talking about today, which is the mainstream journalism versus what appears on Facebook. And there was a university-sponsored panel, and we're chatting away, and my colleagues quite rightly said, well, what we've got to do is make sure that our reporting is accurate, fair, with bias removed, and dealing with and I sort of said, well, isn't that our mission statement now? Right. Isn't that what we should be doing now? Right. I said our biggest task will be to educate the news consumer, and it remains that. Now, how you do it, I don't know. I simply tossed off this pearl of wisdom and walked away. I think one way would be through children or young people, if you encourage them to concentrate on issues that directly affect them. It might be university education fees, it might be employment, it might be climate change, it might be something more local, and encourage them to go to appropriate sources, not gossip over the fence or some rag that's tossed out willy-nilly. Go to where they can be confident of the information, and if that habit or that process is instilled relatively early, it'll be there later on in life when they're dealing with other issues.
That's a good name for a website, actually, Gossip Over the Fence. I like that very much. But I just want to go to Jacinta next, because I know that your sister's a primary school teacher and this is one of the things that she grapples with. What have you learnt from her?
Well, what I learnt from her was that children don't innately know the difference between fake news and regular news. Her experience was actually in trying to teach grade 3 children to analyse a news website about Dog Island, where owners took their dogs for holidays. The dogs lived by themselves and could stay on the island for as much as they wanted. The prices were extremely high, but none of the children questioned the content on this website because it was on a website. And in fact, one of the children even had arguments with her and insisted that the information was correct. But I think part of the bigger challenge is around teaching children to critically think and analyse information that they're reading. And I believe that this isn't just a job for the education system, but it's also something that starts at home. We need to be sure that we're not filtering out information for children because they live in a technological era. They're going to access information all the time. These are challenges that they're facing now that I myself did not have to experience as a child. So the challenge here is making sure that we can teach our children to have opinions, to form opinions, to critically think about what they're reading, and to actually implement these critical thinking skills earlier in their education and across a broad range of subjects.
Right.
Because, I mean, at the moment, as it stands, we don't really touch on critical thinking skills until children really enter year 10 and even into university education. So I think
Right.
we need to start earlier on that.
Beyond. And Saffron, you can't help but wonder whether the real problem is not actually with children, but with adults, because a lot of the studies show that it's adults that are much more likely to pass on fake news than younger people. Or do you hope that it might be a flow-on effect? If you get the children right, they can school their elders.
Yeah, look, I think I seriously agree with everything Cindy said, by the way. I think critical thinking is at the heart of media literacy. And I do think it's something that absolutely needs to extend beyond the education system. And in order for parents to be able to help their kids at home while they're on social media or whatever it might be, we also need to arm their parents with the tools to be able to spot, the difference between misinformation and disinformation and opinion and news and advertising and news and whatever it might be. So I think it definitely needs to go beyond the school environment, and critical thinking is definitely at the heart of that.
Peter.
Look, one of the recommendations of Rod Sims' report on fixing big tech was to increase digital literacy across society. Saffron's book's a fantastic contribution to that. In the old days, we used to have a Meccano set to work out how a bridge worked, and this is kind of like the way of putting together how information works. So hopefully our kids get it and then we get it too.
Right.
I have just a very short thing to say. Can I just make a plea in all of this that critical thinking not be a euphemism for teaching kids what we want them to think? Because
Absolutely.
kids ask why all the time, and we should be encouraging that and asking why ourselves, and not putting a cap on what they can ask
Until they hit the teen years, and then they're more likely to say, why do you
Why not?
exist, and how can you get through life with such a stupidity problem? Saffron, you do such good work in this area. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.